right, next up, everyone, we want to go out to Pontiac, Michigan. This is where the Oakland County Sheriff is speaking on a case and an investigation where a mom is accused of leaving alone her kids in a neglected home for years. Let's listen on Live Now from Fox. Some of this content could be very, very hard to really retain here, so viewer discretion is advised as we learn the details of this case.
Agreement was arrived at in 2022, but the mother still would not allow him to see the kids. So that's what we've learned so far, at least preliminarily. We're going to go back and double check all these timelines and that kind of information. So he, in essence, had lost contact with the kids. And that's where that stood. So we've had questions about that. The other questions that we've had was, who were the other people potentially dropping food at the house other than the mother? So far, again, the investigation is pretty layered and complex, given that it's going over years. But it appears that those are companies, like an Instacart or a DoorDash, things like that. So, so far, none of the people that were coming to the house had any awareness that there were kids inside or the situation in which they were delivering to. Obviously, the question was somebody dropping food off knowing there's kids there? No information at this point leads us to believe that. The kids were forensically interviewed with our partners at Care House. They've already been seen once at McLaren. We intend to have them at a much more detailed both physical and mental health kind of checkup, if you will, that will happen hopefully this week. When our detectives saw them at their interview at Care House, they were already making amazing progress, having had some tender love, having had some supportive care, having been put in new clothing and some basic hygiene. The one detective said that the little girl was talking quite a bit. So that's super exciting to see that happening. And as it relates to being in the house, the only one of the three that ever came out was the young boy, and he came out twice. Once because he wanted to feel the grass, which by itself is heartbreaking, and a second time to check the mail. So you wouldn't do this to an animal, let alone your child. So, just to hear that he came out to touch the grass is just crushing, soul crushing on so many levels. As it relates to the house, we have obviously released pictures. I'll get my technical expert up. You've already seen some of these pictures. I rolled that little mouse, but it didn't want to cooperate. So inside of the home, as I had mentioned with these pictures, trash was piled, in some places 3 and 4 foot high. Everything was covered with feces and trash. The toilet had become non-functional, and the bathtub was filled with feces. That's the kind of situation these poor kids had been living in for years, not just hours or days, for years. And so when you have the complete lack of hygiene, a complete breakdown of basic living conditions that they were subjected to. And to get a little deeper into that, detectives have narrowed down the initial abandonment they believe to be somewhere in the spring to summer of 2020. Obviously, COVID played a little part in the disconnect potentially with schools and school communications. In 2020, the mother dropped off some trash bags, gloves, and Febreze, and that was about the last thing related to hygiene. 2020, in the height of COVID, okay? Towards the end, the children apparently were getting a loaf of bread dropped off that was intended to last 3 to 4 days. So, obviously on so many levels, the conditions are horrendous and the situation terrible. So what we're trying to do in the meantime, and as it relates specifically to the case, the preliminary report has been turned over to the prosecutor. We're adding some more stuff for them. They're in the process of determination. When I heard about this, I called her on the weekend and let it know it was coming, and she has her staff queued up, and they're in that process. As it relates to the kids, the first thing we wanted to do is obviously get them safe and to get them clean and get them enclosed. And I will say we have one of the most generous communities, I think, in the world. We put on there that we needed clothing, and this is just a tiny sample of what we've received. At the office of another office of ours, we have bags and bags. So we don't need any more clothing. We greatly appreciate it. The family and the kids greatly appreciate it. And so we're kind of pivoting now to financial support. And we have put up a link, if you will, to the charity Mission Oakland. And 100% of it will go to the kids. Unlike some of the traditional fundraising methodologies you see out there, they take a percentage. 100% of this will go to the kids. What I am asking is, again, our generous viewers and listeners out there and readers, we're looking for a law firm that would set up a trust fund so that we can take 100% of what we receive in donations for these kids and put it in a trust that can be administered, that can take care of maybe their medical bills, mental health visits, and if there's any overage, maybe set some money aside for their future education. This is going to be a long-term situation, and so we'd like to be able to kind of hand the baton to a trust fund that will manage it in a way that makes sure it's just the kids. Not suggesting anybody else would do anything with it, but we're looking for a mechanism where we can hand this off. So if there's a firm out there that would like to set up a trust fund for these kids, then we'll deposit any receipts that we have. In a very short period of time, I think we've already got $15,000 to $20,000 in on our donations. So we're going to, obviously have some real dollars to be able to give these kids, but that won't make up for the 3-4 years that they've been subjected to these conditions. I've said this more than once, but you see those videos of animals in just terrible conditions on commercials, and it pulls at your heartstrings. Imagine maybe by 10 living in what we showed you, and then play it out over years, not days or weeks. So it's hard to wrap your head around this one. So there's going to be a lot of long-term, I think, mental health and educational needs and things that we want to try to help with the family to get to that point. The other thing I'd like to mention, the family is asking, apparently, some of the folks that are now involved with the kids that didn't know, that's another question we've asked, they didn't know what was going on with the kids. They had been told by her that somebody else was babysitting the children or other kinds of things. So they were unaware what was happening so far, according to our investigation. But what they're asking is they feel like they're being hounded by media outlets. So they'd like to get some privacy for their kids and the grandkids and aunts, and those folks want just a little bit of a safe bubble, if you would. So they asked that, which of course we're going to do. Now, on another front, all of us are asking, how the heck did this happen? How did we lose 3 kids? How did they fall through the system? The community, the relatives, the schools, how did no one know? And the easiest answer we could come up with, and I put on my old legislative hat, and thank heavens we've got a person on our staff that also had worked in the legislature, and we examined the school code, and there's some gaps that we think in part allowed this to happen. And so what we're going to suggest is there needs to be some changes in state law. Right now, basically, there is no specific duty required that is triggered by certain actions. So what I mean by that is a school district, in this case, received a request for records from another school in Pontiac, but no verification the children ever moved to that school. And so at some point, when they didn't show up, they were just dropped off the enrollment of the school that sent the transcripts. So no one knew that they were nowhere. And so what we're proposing, and we're already communicating to a potential bill sponsor, is some amendments to the school code that will close that communication gap so that before a child is unenrolled, they have to obtain written confirmation that child's someplace else. That doesn't happen now. And that's what happened here, it appears. It's still, again, being investigated because we're going back years and trying to check records. But it looks like based on that request for records, neither of them knew where that child was and presumed, I guess, that the other one had the children. So the other thing, this is the specific language, but it goes into basically filling that gap, closing that hole so that if a child doesn't show up at a school for a period of time, then it triggers a follow-up where they have to communicate with either a truancy officer or law enforcement to begin an examination of what happened to these kids. Where are they? You know, it's unbelievable to think that we've got 3 kids that fell off everybody's map for years. So that goes to the second part, as I said, within 20 days, the sending school that sent those records has to notify the truancy officer if they have not received written confirmation that that child is someplace else safe. So it shortens the window. First trigger is 10 days, second trigger is 20 days. And obviously, this can be worked on, amended, or changed by the legislature. We're just suggesting there's got to be some accountability measures so we don't have kids fall through the cracks in such a horrific way. And that is the direct donation link to the children and their needs. So that's kind of the basics of where we are. As I said, we're going to have some follow-up investigative things we're going to be doing. We're going to check much more deeply the children's physical and mental well-being. Obviously, we're going to need to get an educational assessment on where they are. Without any education for a period of years, you know, you hear how many kids across this country fell way behind from 1 year of COVID. Imagine where these kids are. And so you know, we don't have a clue. Where are they educationally in terms of acuity and also mental health and all the developmental things that happen in those critical years? You know, we don't know. And they're going to have needs with that. So it's a big undertaking, a big process, and one of the most tragic long-term abuse situations I've ever seen. I've been in this a long time. So that's kind of where we sit. Questions?
What did mom say or do to make her children so scared of leaving the house for years?
They were just scared. I don't know that she said anything particular that she's admitted to us, but they were afraid to leave. I know that much.
What's the latest with mom? I know the prosecutor's looking at this, but where is she? What's going on?
She's in custody with us.
Is she cooperating?
Yeah, I mean, she's talking to us, but we've got some follow-up secondary things that we want to ask her based on more information that's come to our attention since this originally, surprisingly, came to our attention when we were thinking we were going to check on her welfare and found 3 kids.
Any idea on the state of her mental health?
I have no information or background that she's got any mental health challenges, but obviously that will be all part of the case.
It's a message for everyone who's stepped up to make donations, whether that's been financial or all these supplies that have come in.
A heartfelt warm thank you to everybody that has stepped up. I mean, as I said, in very short order, we got a ton of clothing, so much we had to say, okay, we got enough of that. Let's pivot to other ways we can help, and people have jumped in on that. I honestly think we have one of the most generous communities in the world, and I've seen it time and time again. You know, I mean, this goes back more than 20 years when I went to Ground Zero after 9/11. and so many police and fire families were decimated. And at that time, there was no mechanism. They immediately had their livelihood cut off, and these families had no income whatsoever. And so I started raising money in this area for the New York firefighters and police officers, and we raised hundreds of thousands of dollars in very short order and gave it to those families before they got any assistance from anyone else. That's this community. That's the heart and soul of this community. So, I just say thank you.
What about the landlord? Usually when you're renting, the landlord or somebody will come in and do a maintenance check. What are they saying?
Well, the landlord's the one that actually called in a welfare check. He said he hadn't heard from who he thought was the tenant for a period of time, and she hadn't paid her rent since October. So, typically a landlord would respond if there's complaints about something not working, but he was unaware of any of this. He actually sent us there to check on what he thought was his tenant, and that's when we found the kids.
And what's going to happen to that apartment or that townhouse right now? Is it dangerous for the people that are, next door? It's a kind of compact area.
Yeah, that will probably be up to the health department and other folks that will have to make a determination of how they move that forward. When we processed that scene for evidentiary value, our folks were wearing hazmat suits. On every level, it's a biohazard.
How about any debriefing for the officers who found that? Do they go through any kind of debriefing? That's got to be kind of hard for them.
It's horrific. Again, I've been in this business a long time. The worst thing for our folks, our men and women on the front lines, is when they have an issue with kids. Because most of them, bring that home in a way that connect. They look at their kid and they see the other kid in this situation, and they just begin to, personalize it, and it tears them up. So thankfully, we've got a great peer-to-peer program, and that was initiated immediately once we learned what the situation was, to both debrief them and make sure that they have some opportunity to process what they were involved in and how to, in a healthy way, move forward. After you see some of the terrible things we see in our world, homicides and abuse, you'll never unsee it, but you have to find a healthy way to process it and then take another step forward and go back out and continue to do your job.
Were comfort dogs like Callie brought into the kids at the hospital and things, and how did that go? And
yes, I think 2 came right away, and that's been, here Callie sits in this corner. Our comfort dogs have been involved in so many tragedies. When I started this program, I thought, well, this will be helpful here and there. It's almost a daily thing. It is daily if you consider how it helps our people. But, think where these dogs have been. They've been to Oxford. They've been to the splash pad scene. They've been to suicides. They've been to, one thing after another. And I think they make an amazing difference.
Do you have any information at all as to why this mom would do this for years to her children?
Not at this point. They're going to, again, try to ask her some more questions. That's all part of the investigation, how or why. I don't think there's never going to be an answer any of us can understand or accept on the why. How do you? Anybody that's a parent looks at their kids and thinks, what a blessing, what a gift. And to allow this to happen, I don't think anyone, whether you have kids or not, will ever wrap your head around. But, maybe we can get some insight what she was thinking, but it will never satisfy any of us.
Do we know where she was living while they were living there?
Elsewhere in Pontiac.
Like a friend's house? Was it a family member?
Who was she living with?
Yeah.
Yeah, I probably won't get into that at this point.
It seems just kind of elaborate that she'd go to all these lengths trying to hide it from her family and all this. What stands out about this to you, Sheriff?
Yeah, the complexity of it, the length of it, on so many levels, it's just hard, again, to wrap your head around. If you don't want to be a parent, then there's mechanisms in place. There's methodologies to either give your child up for adoption or to other family members. There's never an excuse to abuse your child or abandon your kids. There just isn't. There's so many people that are just wanting a child in their life out there. And I know there's, a lot of kids that haven't been adopted, but anything's better than this. If that's not in your wheelhouse to be a parent, then, let someone else have a chance at that role.
Thank you.
All right, very disturbing story out of Oakland County, Michigan there, as now the mom is in custody after this investigation showed just horrible living situation for these 3 children out in Pontiac, Michigan there. So again, Oakland County Sheriff's Office putting this out there saying we have arrested a Pontiac woman in a child abuse case. The sheriff's thoughts on this case saying, throughout my extensive career in this field, I have never encountered a scenario as dire and prolonged as this one, involving abandonment, neglect, and abuse of the highest power there. So yeah, just a sad story all the way around right there.